Hey guys, good to be here tonight. My name is Robert Copeland. I am the pastor of small groups and men's ministry here at the Harbor. So excited to be with you tonight. Hey, first off, can we welcome back Timothy Gerald to Merge after his third kid? Where's Tim? It's so bright. Tim, hey, we know you didn't do anything, but hey, congratulations.
Good to be back.
Good to have you back, Timmy. Glad you're back. Well, man, let's wrap this series up. So if you haven't been here, we want to just kind of catch you up, or maybe if you have been, you slept since you've been here. And so let's just kind of catch up of what's going on in this series. Fear not, what now? So 3 things that we would hope that you would get out of this series, right? That you would see. First off, that you would know that God has called you out of fear, but to trust in Him because He's always there for you. That you know that God, over 365 times, God has called you in the Bible not to fear not, and that He's there for you. The second one is that you would acknowledge that we all have fears, and that as long as we live on this earth, that fears can creep in. And I think you saw that with Blake earlier. Blake said, raise your hands, and you kind of looked around, and everybody, I was in the back, and almost everybody's hand was raised before the first 3 were done. So the reality is that we acknowledge that we have these fears, and we will have them, and they can creep in as long as we're here on earth. But then third, in this series, kind of the what not piece, is that we would take real steps to trusting God in our fears, right? That we would take steps forward in our fears and putting our trust in God. So I want us to also be on the same page of kind of the fears we're talking about, right? So the fears we're talking about is this idea that it is a life-altering type fear, right? It's this fear that, in other words, the fear that we're talking about here is that it affects how you think and how you live your day. So some of these fears, you may run it over in your head over and over again. You may wake up kind of nightmares, dreaming about these fears. You may go out of your way to dodge certain things because you're so, this fear is so over you and just kind of a grip on you that it changes and alters how you live your life. So we're not talking about being scared of snakes, right? We're not saying oh my gosh, I'm scared of snakes. Okay, God said I shouldn't, so I'm going to pick up this copperhead. No, that's not what we're talking about. I'm scared of spiders. Oh no, God told me not to. Come here, little brown recluse. That's not what we're talking about. Or being scared by your friends, right? Somebody's I jumped. God, I'm sorry I sinned. That's not what we're talking about. Not really a video. Let's see this real quick. Not this.
Oh my goodness.
Why?
Kathy!
Oh my gosh.
Fix that new one is if somebody
Debbie!
Oh my gosh.
So that they're not in sin. That's being scared, right? By the way, Blake got a big talking to. Debbie gave Blake this real big talking to, and he's in Debbie's doghouse right now. So he's gonna have to crawl out of that. But that's not the fear we're talking about. That's being scared, right? That's not this fear we are discussing tonight. The fear that we're talking about is almost crippling when you think about it. So tonight, some of these fears that you already raised your hand to, that just kind of an idea, maybe the fear of rejection. You kind of raised your hand around that one. It's this fear of people will see you and look at you and go, we don't want you. And that could devastate you. Or maybe it's the fear of losing control, that when you're not in control of things and you're not the one being the puppeteer, it scares you that you don't have control over stuff. Maybe you're have this deep fear of death, right? Maybe death in your life or a loved one, and so it really just cripples how you live your life. Or maybe you have this fear. I know we kind of joke of like, oh no, like FOMO, like I'm scared of missing out. But maybe there's this true fear that if you miss out on some fun, like you don't go to Bible study, you don't go to small group until like the last minute because you're scared, there may be something big come up. And so therefore you can't live out the discipline God's called you to live out because you have this fear of missing out that you cannot live in a normal way because you're so scared and so fearful that it's altering how you live. Maybe you're scared of the future, like what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen this week. Maybe especially if you're a senior or getting a little older, you're like, man, I don't know what that looks like. Or you have a sibling that just moved out and went to college, like, man, what is this? Life looks weird now. I don't know. Maybe you have the fear of vulnerability. And maybe there's a fear of vulnerability because when the reality is when you're vulnerable, you're really getting real with yourself. And so you don't really like who that is. And so there's this fear of being real with people. Like you're scared of people seeing who you really are because reality is you don't like who you really are, right? And so there's this fear that manifests itself in vulnerability. Or maybe it's a fear of failure, right? Like you're not going to be good enough. So you don't even try out for a sport you love because you may get cut and your friends may laugh. And there may be this failure piece that you don't know how to deal with or how other people think about you. You may be trying, like every time you come around people, you're just nervous about saying the right things and doing the right things because you're so overwhelmed and your life is so altered by fears of what people are going to think about you that you're scared to be yourself around certain people. And so you change who you are. Maybe some of these are fears that you can relate to and go, dude, that's me. And God is calling you tonight to fear not in those moments and to take steps out of those fears. So tonight we're going to wrap up this Fear Not Now What series. And I want us to look, and we're going to look at 3 men in the Bible who trust God in really what I would say in the face of fear, better than anyone else throughout Scripture except for Jesus. I really think this is one of the best pictures of looking fear in the face and running head on towards this fear and fearing not. And so, but before that, before we get to the text we're going to look at, the scripture we're going to look at tonight, I want us to hear really the main idea of tonight, the main idea of the message, and that is this, that being courageous is not the victory, right? Like, so just going, cool, I'm not scared of it anymore. Yay, victory. That's not what we're talking about. That the idea of being courageous is not the victory. The victory is found in where you find your courage. So it's not just not being scared or not having this life-altering fear. It is where and what changes fear into courage, right? Where that is found, that is where the victory lies. And we're talking about a little bit more about that in a second. So if I wanted also to define really biblical courage and what that looks like. Biblical courage is trusting God regardless of the outcome. That you can say, God, I trust you, so therefore I'm going to run towards you in my fears regardless of what happens. So in other words, God, I love this and I have a fear of failure. I love this sport. I love this thing. I'm going to go try out, and if I fail, it's okay because I don't care of the outcome because, God, I'm not going to let that win. Biblical courage is trusting God regardless of the outcome. So let's look at the story of these 3 men from the book of Daniel. So I got to give you the background of Daniel chapter 3 and what's going on in the book of Daniel chapter 3 first before we get to really Daniel chapter 3. So what's going on in the Old Testament, the history of Israel, is Israel is saying, and they kind of go through these cycles, right, where they trust God, but then they say, God, we really want what we want. God's like, don't do that. And he's like, people of Israel kind of like would be, I guess, equated to you and I. We go, God, I really want this. And so there's a period where they say, God, we really want a king. God, we want a king. We want a king to rule us. And they say, God says, you don't need a king. They're going to lead you astray. Trust me. I'm the best king, the only king. Let me be the king. And the Israelites go, yeah, but we really want a king. And so they get a king. And ultimately it starts the books of, anybody? First Kings, Second Kings, yes, you got it. First and Second Kings, right? And so you kind of hear the story. At the end of Second Kings chapter 24 is really kind of where stuff picks up in Daniel chapter 3. Because what happens in Second Kings 24 is the Israelites, Jerusalem, they get overtaken by the city of Babylon and the ruler of Babylon. And so you hear of them being sieged and them being taken over. And obviously when you are a slave to someone and taken over, you have to follow what they tell you to do. So the king there, King Nebuchadnezzar, that's fun to say, Nebuchadnezzar. Say it with me. Nebuchadnezzar, that's a fun one. So one more time. King And if you don't know it, just King Never Say Never, right? Katie gave me that joke. Thanks, Katie. Like, never say... No, that wasn't good. Sorry, Katie. Katie, that was bad. So King Nebuchadnezzar, so here's what we're going to do tonight. I need your help on this. Anytime I say king and I point at you, you say... Okay, so let's try it. So if I'm talking and I'm like, blah, 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 king. Now, listen, time out real quick. I don't want you to get like premature on me and I'll be like, king, and you'll be like, Nebuchadnezzar. I'll be like, not now. So I have to point at you, okay? So I'm talking, I'm like, king, da-da-da-da. Good job. So I'm like, hey, da-da-da-da, king. Perfect. Let's see how we're paying attention here in a little bit. So we get back in Israel. They are overtaken. King is dominating them. They're slaves at this point to Babylon. And so the story of Daniel's broken up into 12 chapters. Verses 1 through 6 is the story of Daniel and his three friends. And then 7 through 12 is then really the prophecy and the interpretation of King and his dreams, right? It's Daniel. That was weak, by the way. His dreams and how Daniel really interpreted those for his understanding. And we'll get talked about that here in a second too. And so we lead up to Daniel chapter 1 is Daniel and these three men who we're going to look at in depth in chapter 3, which is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men and Daniel, they right out of the gate, they're awesome dudes, and they're really kind of promoted up through the ranks of Babylon and kind of their government, if you will. And right out of the gate, Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar, they say, hey, you got to do these things. You've got to eat this way and worship these things. And right out of the gate, they're like, no, that's not, like, God's instructed us not to do that, so we're not going to do that. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, cool, like, I'll honor that. And so right out of the gate, they show courage and saying, man, we're not going to do what God told us not to do. And so through that, God promotes them through just his goodness, promotes them up in the government in the kingdom of Babylon, if you will. And then we get to chapter 2. In chapter 2, King is having great, crazy, like weird dreams, right? And so he's having a hard time understanding these dreams. He has a hard time really kind of like, what does this all mean? I don't get this. So he brings in all sorts of people like magicians and false prophets and all these guys. And he's like, hey, I'm having weird dreams. Tell me about them. And these guys come in like, I guess there was a unicorn. He's like, wrong. Get him out of here, right? And so all of a sudden he brings in Daniel. And Daniel, man, God gave Daniel the vision, and Daniel says, man, here's the dreams you've been having, and here's what they mean. Chapter 7 through 12. Here's what you've heard, here's what you've seen in your dreams, and here's what's happening. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, his mind is blown, and he's like, dude, yes. And so he promotes Daniel again, really to like his chief advisor, if you will, like promotes Daniel almost as high as you can go under him. And Daniel says, but wait, if you're going to promote me, man, my friends need to be promoted too. I think they're going to be great. And he really brings his friends up with him. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are then elevated to a high position in that government. So now we start chapter 3 and the story of these three men and how they look in the face of fear. See, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were three men who trusted the Lord regardless of the outcome. See, a day comes when King Nebuchadnezzar, he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build this gold idol. I'm going to build this really tall, about 9-story tall, like totem pole looking idol. And there's going to be an idol on it. We don't know what the idol is. It doesn't say. Some people speculate that it was him, like an idol of himself. Others, it's just one of his gods. And so King Nebuchadnezzar is like, I'm going to build this idol. And anytime music plays in the city, you are commanded, you as the whole city of Babylon, Jerusalem, Israel, everybody, you're commanded to come and to bow down at this idol and worship this idol. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they hear this, right? It's not like a secret. They hear this command, if you will, from King Nebuchadnezzar, and they hear about it. And so word gets back. Word gets back that that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they are not falling down and worshiping this idol. Now, I kind of forgot to tell you, King Nebuchadnezzar also says this. He says, and if anyone doesn't fall down and worship this idol, they are to be thrown in the fiery furnace. And I think it's important to note that it says fiery furnace, so it's not just like thrown in the furnace and lit on fire, but like fiery furnace. So kind of like this idea that it's going to be burning, and kind of this remembrance of like, listen, that thing's really hot, and if you don't bow down, you're getting thrown in there, right? So this is fiery furnace that's happening here. And so what happens is word gets back to King Nebuchadnezzar that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they are not bowing down. And so they are brought before King Nebuchadnezzar. Those three men are brought before the king. And they say, listen, King Nebuchadnezzar, these three men, they are not bowing down. Nebuchadnezzar said, cool, listen, I get it. Here's the deal. I'm going to give you one more shot. I'm going to go ahead and play some music. I like you guys, man. Like, I like you. I promoted you. Things are good. I'm going to play the music, and I'm going to give you one more shot to bow down. Started the music, and they're like, hold up. Man, hold on. We already know what we're going to say, and we're not going to do that. We're not going to bow down. He's like, listen, you don't, like, fiery furnace, you're getting chunked in there. Like, yeah, no. We get the commandment. We get what's going to happen, but we are not going to follow what you tell us to do. Now, obviously, this is not the only time that they have not followed the orders of King Nebuchadnezzar, and every time God has shown himself faithful, which I think you and I can relate to. And without a shadow of a doubt, these three men were scared. Like, we can't elevate this and go, man, it's a Bible story, but we can't say like this is some magical being. These are three men who understand that when fire hits skin, it hurts, and too much of it kills them in a very bad way. And so there is fear, like there is this fear in them. You have to know, like, I can just imagine them sitting down having this conversation of like, what are we gonna do it? I'm scared, dude. Me too. What are we going to do? We're not going to bow down. You're right. We're not. We're not going to. And at some point, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had to have biblical courage. They had to have biblical courage to say, we are not going to worship the idols, and run head on straight after into what for them was going to be death. Now, real quick, a break from the story. I highly doubt that any one of you will be commanded to to worship some golden idol, and if not, you'd be thrown in the fire. Like, I doubt you're ever going to have to face that fear, but you will have to face the idols of popularity, of being the best athlete, of being the smartest, of being successful. You're going to face the idols in this world that the world's going to say, you must bow down to these or else. And you know what? A side note, the side note is the lies that the idols like speak to you really is the engine a lot of time that's driving the fear. Right? Think about that. The idols that say, hey, if you don't, and if you're not the most successful, if you're not the most popular, life is going to be just like hell on earth, and it's going to be horrible. And that in return is what fuels the fear to go, I got to be popular. Back to the story. So word gets out that King Nebuchadnezzar, that these three Jews are not bound down. Like we said, they take their stand. They take their stand and they say, I'm going to pay. And I love the words they use. They say, King Nebuchadnezzar, these men are paying no attention to you. That's how they're described. They're paying no attention to you. So as I said, King Nebuchadnezzar brings them before him. And I want to start in verse 16. I want us to kind of read through that. It's going to be on the screens if you don't have your Bible. If you do, go ahead and open that if you haven't already. Daniel chapter 3. We're going to start in verse 16. So we're up to the scene, and just to make sure we're on the same page, we're up to the scene that they're before King Nebuchadnezzar, and in their response, here's their response. Once Nebuchadnezzar's like, okay, go ahead, bow down. Here's your one more shot. Here's what happens. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered to the king, saying, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If there be so our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, he will deliver us out of the hand, O king. Verse 18. Oh, this is a sweet verse, and we're going to spend a second on this here in a little bit. Verse 18. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed. So it notes that like he got angry. It notes that he was furious, no pun intended, about them not bowing down. Verse 20. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the fiery furnace. So right before that verse 19, they said, dude, he said, like, heat this thing up. And imagine kind of like this upside down bowling pin, if you will, right? Like almost like a rocket stove, right? Where the fuel's pumped in there and air's pumped in, so it becomes crazy hot. And so they then say, bind these men up, wrap them up. And some really smart guys believe that they wanted to be wrapped up, and the king wanted them wrapped up so they would burn up better, right? So it wasn't just flesh, but their clothes would catch, and it would burn them all the more. And so he ordered some of his men to bind them up, and then they cast them in the fiery furnace. Verse 21. Then these men were bound in the cloaks, tunics, and their hats, and their other garments, and they would be thrown in the fiery furnace. Verse 22, because the king's order was urgent and the furnace was overheated, the flame of the fire killed the men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the men who were like walking them up to the fire to throw them in, it said the fire was so hot that it killed the men that were walking them up there. Some commentaries, they believe that the fire would have been around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Your oven rocks at like 400, right? 1,800 degrees. And so the men that walked them up to the fire, it killed them. And there, these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they fell bound into the fiery furnace. But then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose up as fast as he could in haste. He rose up. He declared to the counselors, did we not cast 3 men into that fiery furnace? They answered him and said, O king, this is true, true, O king. And he answered and said, but I see 4 men bound in there. I see 4 men in this fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the sons of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the fiery furnace, and he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they came out of the fiery furnace, and all the different officials, all the high people of government, and they gathered and they saw that these men, not a hair on their head was singed. Their cloaks were not harmed, and the smell of fire had not come upon them. They didn't even smell like smoke. And then in verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, bless the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel to deliver the servants who trusted him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any other little g god except their own God. Did you hear that? What a testimony. What a testimony of courage of these brothers that would call the same God that we do, like our brothers. What a testimony of them. That they would stand firm in their faith. Did you see their biblical courage? Because notice what was biblical courage? That you trust God no matter the outcome. So the outcome, they knew probably 10 out of 10 times when something's thrown in a fire, it's burned up. Like it would have taken a miracle of God to save them. They knew the outcome in their stance, and it wasn't good. But no matter the outcome, biblical courage, do you see the courage they had? Now, after hearing that story, we cannot help but be in awe that God sent his son and that he had mercy on them and that he rescued them from the fire. We're in awe of that. But I want us to look through the lens of our series here tonight, Fear Not. We must see that the victory that is behind the courage of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is the point, the main point. The victory is not that we have courage, but yet where that courage comes from. The victory is not that they had enough courage not to bow down, but where they found their courage from. In the Amazon Prime Video documentary, No Greater Love, it's about this chaplain who took this camera into war. And he tells at one point that they're in this group called No Slack, which is a unit, of the 101st Airborne, one of the famous Army units. And in this documentary, Captain Kevin Mott, and there's a picture of him, Captain Kevin Mott, he almost dies due to an RPG blast. He's ripped up and he has to be sent home, and the reality is he shouldn't even be alive. And so he's sent home all banged up and all tore to shreds, and he rehabs and he gets stronger. And about 6 months after he returned to the U.S., he ultimately lies about some physicals so he can get back over to the fights in Afghanistan. And he goes back over, and when asked the question on this video, why did you go back? Captain Mott, why did you go back? At this point, you were already a hero. Why did you go back? He said, I know there's a God, little g, out there somewhere that protected me. I know that. But the reason that I came back was for my brothers and to show the terrorists that they did not win. Now, we are so thankful for men like Captain Mott. We thank God for men that have courage like Captain Mott did. That's awesome. But as followers of Jesus, our courage comes from God. See, Captain Mott, though a hero, though he was courageous beyond belief, he did not have his courage rooted in Jesus. His courage was rooted elsewhere. And so for you and I, our courage, we must find that courage, and that courage comes from Jesus. So, as we wrap up, what now? Because this series is called Fear Not, What Now? So 3 points as we leave. First, I want to encourage you. Here are some practical ways. First off, don't be an ostrich. Don't be an ostrich, okay? Ostrich, they're known for sticking their head in the sand. And if you know anything about ostriches, it's kind of a myth, because the story goes that they stick their head in the sand when they're scared. And you may have heard the saying, kind of like you have your head in the sand, right? And that idea that when something's coming your way and you don't want to deal with it, that you just put your head down in the sand. And so, first off, I want to encourage you, don't be an ostrich. Expect trials, expect fears to come your way. And when they do, don't just bury your head in the sand and be like, la, 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 no, okay. Like even tonight, some of you, like Blake asked you to raise your hand at the beginning and you were like, head in the sand, right? Because you didn't want to acknowledge and say, yeah, I do struggle with that. Students, when we put our heads in the sand and we hide from our fears, all it really does is magnify them. All it does is make them bigger. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they knew what was coming, but they did not hide from it. They didn't take off and try to escape. I would dare say that their faith in God grew in the middle of their hardship. Even Jesus in John 16:33, Jesus says, in me there is peace, but in this world there will be trouble. So don't be an ostrich. Don't shove your head in the sand when it comes to fear. Next practical piece I want you to just write down and be about is fight, don't flight. Fight, don't flight. Because reality is, students, when you run from your fears, you know what happens? They keep chasing you. They keep chasing you. 1 Peter 3:8 that describes Satan as a roaring lion seeking to devour his prey. What do lions do to their prey? They chase them down. So I want to encourage you, guys, no matter where you're at, maybe tonight's the first time you really acknowledge one of those fears. And I encourage you, fight it. Don't run from it. Expect it's coming. Fight it. Square it up and fight it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it doesn't say that they got like drug into this fire. I can almost imagine, right? It's not in scripture, but if we could just like imagine, I could almost imagine them like just walking in boldly. Fight, don't flight. And last one to write down and just to really embrace is live even if he doesn't lifestyle. What do I mean by that? Notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their response was this to King Nebuchadnezzar. They go ahead, bow down. And they said, time out, we're not going to. Because King Nebuchadnezzar, I believe God will save me. I believe God can save us. But even if he doesn't, I'm not going to bow down. I believe he can, I believe he will, but even if he doesn't, I'm not going to bow down to this. Students, no matter the outcome, no matter what's on the other side, live a lifestyle. Live a lifestyle, no matter what happens, you don't bow down to your fears. And know that God can and he will, but even if he doesn't. Live that lifestyle. So to wrap up, I want to encourage you with this last thing. Really simple. Students, be encouraged. Adults, be encouraged. Have no fear because the war is won in Jesus. Have no fear. The war is won. So therefore, live in that victory, right? Live in that victory. And again, the victory isn't courage. It's where you find your courage. Be courageous. No matter the outcome. No matter what happens. And face your fears. Students, be encouraged. Have no fear. The war is won. Live the victory. Be courageous.